It's not the first time that Canada tries to divert attention from problems at home by pointing fingers at others. In May, remains of 250 Indigenous children were found at the site of a former residential school in British Columbia. Some of them were as young as 3 years old. Since then, 2 more unmarked grave sites have been found, one holding 751 bodies and the other 182. People are now asking how many more are out there. China's mission to the UN Human Rights Council has an estimate.
Between the 1830s and 1990s, over 150,000 Indigenous children in Canada were reported to have been forcibly taken away from their parents. At least 4,000 children died of disease, neglect, accidents, or abuse while at school.
China has called for a thorough and impartial investigation into all cases where crimes were committed against Indigenous people, especially children. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau responded by drawing comparisons.
In Canada, we had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Where is China's Truth and Reconciliation Commission?
Reconciliation, a word we hear all the time from Canadian officials, but is it really happening? It's a divide that goes back hundreds of years to the time when Europeans were first arrived in North America. They settled down in indigenous lands and started to snuff out the so-called Indian problem. They launched Indian residential schools in the 1870s at the beginning of what some have called the darkest chapter in Canadian history. In 1920, the Indian Act was amended to make it mandatory for Indigenous children to attend residential schools. It's estimated that 150,000 children were taken from their families and placed in these schools. They were not allowed to speak their language or to practice their culture, and many were mistreated and abused. The goal was to, I quote, kill the Indian in the child. According to some estimates, the mortality rate was as high as 60% in some schools. The last residential school closed in 1996, but the impact of these constitutions is still palpable today.
She was really abused, and it's really hard to walk by a church or go into a church because it's very traumatizing to have to face that again. It's really sad and devastating.
Many victims are still waiting for some form of closure, with every new grave reminding them of the harsh reality of their past.